Sean Delaney was a passenger in a speeding car that was in a collision with another car. Delaney was carrying a cannabis stash, allegedly on the way to a drug deal. Now, the Department of Transport was fighting his claim, as they maintained he was hurt committing a crime, but it lost its final appeal. So that means you and I, now pay legal costs of around £250,000, plus compensation that, it's written, could top £1 million. Delaney was being driven by a fellow drug dealer when the car crashed in November 2006. He suffered life-changing injuries, was in a coma for 3 weeks. He lives in Bedworth in Warwickshire, and he tried to claim compensation from the driver's insurers, but they invoked an exception banning compensation for those using cars for criminal reasons. So instead, his legal team sued the Transport Secretary, claiming the ban violated an EU directive preventing exclusions for victims' compensations. Let's get some of the background to this from someone on the legal front. Joseph Kotrie-Monson is director of Mary Monson Solicitors, a national firm specialising in fraud, serious crime, proceeds of crime, joins me now. How do you react to this potential payout? Good morning.
Well, good morning again, Nick. Well, the law is clear. We are part of the European Union. Whether we like it or not, whether we like the rules or not, the reality is here that there is a harmonised directive. That means that there is law that is in effect for our benefit abroad, but also law that affects us here, which defines how people can claim on insurance. Right. The legal position's always been fairly clear here, which is why, although understandably there's going to be debate about whether this person should be paid out given the fact they had cannabis on them, the reality is that the most surprising thing here is that the Department for Transport took this so far when the law is so clear. The case law it's open shut, and the £250,000 in costs, plus the cost of the Treasury solicitor that hasn't been disclosed internally, which is also taxpayers' money, which is probably about the same, that should never have been spent on some ego trip for the insurance industry when the law is so clear they were always going to lose. And this is yours and my money. I'm not saying necessarily I like the way the law is, but don't waste my money trying to prove it's not the law. So
we are in a position where you and I, as taxpayers, pay out a considerable amount of money to a drug dealer who is injured going about his business.
Well, I mean, that's the way it is. Of course,
I hear that's the way it is, but that's ludicrous, isn't it?
Well, the way the European courts have viewed it is different to the way the English courts, the courts of England and Wales have viewed it. And the reality is here that there's an element of proportionality. It's not just a balmy European law. I'm not saying I agree with it.
How would you define it if it's not balmy?
Well, if you let me finish, I'll explain what the exceptions are. So, for example, if you were if the crime was more serious, perhaps if it was a more serious drug, it was a more serious end of the criminal spectrum. If the car was stolen, all of those exceptions would then apply in the way they do here. It's just the extent to which the exceptions exist. Where you have someone who's been in a coma, perhaps is a paraplegic or whatever, and they had cannabis, which, Nick, let's remember, was decriminalised for a period in this country a short time ago. In quite in living memory. So we're talking about a criminal, but we're certainly not talking about the type of, we may not be talking here about something at the more extreme.
So now we have degrees of criminals as regards payout.
Well,
so a paedophile speeding away with 3 underage children in the back of his white panel van, he can possibly not get compensation, but someone else driving away from Barclays of Fortnum and Masons, if you listen to David Lammy, with a few, or whatever it might be, a bit of alcohol or some food or some cash in the back, he'll be fine, only a bit of shoplifting.
Nick, you're making if I may, you're making a slight error about the driver. This is not about the driver.
The passenger, yeah.
It's the passenger, and the passenger here was a victim of another person's negligence. Of course, it was very unusual because they themselves were involved in, they were committing an offence.
Okay,
there should be a nexus.
So the paedophile's navigator would be entitled to insurance?
Well, I'm not saying that either.
Well, the law does. This is absurd. He's a crook. He's a crook who sadly got very seriously injured in an accident caused by another crook, and the car was full of drugs, and we give him £1 million.
Nick, you're getting angry with the wrong guy. The reality is, The reality is that's how it works. The solution to this is my point. The solution to this was never about making sure that we fight some war in the courts, and possibly even to the Supreme Court. The Department for Transport would be pig-headed enough to take this case, again, at our expense. You don't try and change the law by taking a case to the courts when the law is so simple. You go to legislation.
Thanks for your time, Joseph. Joseph Kotrie-Monson is Director of Mary Monson Solicitors, a national firm specialising in serious crime, fraud and other matters. You may have a reaction on that. You certainly got reaction to defence. We're going to come back to that. We'll hear from the Foreign Secretary. We're facing our biggest threat in decades, but no, there's still no money. We're going to spend lots of money on a high-speed rail link instead.